So good evening. Welcome to our second Crucial Conversations. Our key question this evening is, what does it mean to be human? I'm Dr. Denise Taliaferro-Bazil. I am Associate Dean of Diversity and Student Experience in the College of Education, Health, and Society. And I'm also Professor of Curriculum and Cultural Studies in the Ed Leadership Department. And my work really focuses on race, gender, knowledge, and power. I think a lot about not just how we represent identities in curriculum, but how curriculum actually produces race and gendered identities, and what the consequences of that production is sometimes. And I am joined tonight by my boss. Uh, my boss, my mentor, my friend, um, Bishop, Dean, Dr. Michael Dantley. Um, I'm excited we have these conversations all the time, but we rarely do them in front of other people. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk with him tonight, and um, especially since he's leaving us, which makes me I'm still so distraught about that fact. But so this might be one of our last conversations while he's dean. So I hope you all more than enjoy it, but learn something from what we have to talk about tonight. So this is a conversation, more or less. Dr. Dantley does have some things that he's been thinking a lot about this question. I think I caught him a little off guard. So he's been thinking about it for weeks now. So he's gonna, after I give the opening, he's gonna give a little statement, and then we're gonna go into a conversation. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to keep up with them as we're moving along here. So we've had another difficult couple of weeks, another heinous act of violence on the life of a Black man, Jacob Blake. And then, of course, we've had to process and watch the differential treatment of Jacob Blake with the young 17-year-old teenager vigilante. And, all the details are still pretty sketchy, so we don't know exactly what happened, but we do know that both of these men, young man and man, were treated very differently by the police. And so what I keep thinking about, we keep hearing about fear. The police were afraid, which is probably true in some circumstances, but certainly these last couple of incidents didn't look like fear to me. They look like impulse. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is how that impulse is driven by a logic of racialized human hierarchy, that we think of people, we have thought of people historically as human, less human, and not quite human at all. And often, Black people fall outside of, they enable this hierarchy, but they fall outside of it in terms of their not being considered human. And I don't just mean this literally just in the way that they're treated, but historically into the contemporary moment, we can lay out the curriculum that underwrites Black death. And I always say, long before a body hits the pavement, there's a curriculum that went wrong, that underwrote this persistent death. And so hopefully we're going to, talk about some of that, about this whole discourse of what it means to be human, and talk specifically about academia and our culpability and responsibility in reinforcing that narrative uh, uh, unintentionally or intentionally. So we're gonna start here with Dr. Dantley and his this assignment he's been working on for the last several weeks, and then from there we'll jump into some questions.
Thank you, Denise. I really do appreciate this opportunity to share with you. I did ask Denise if I could make a statement prior to our having the conversation, and I would just ask you to be patient with this statement, because I've almost decided that when this is over, to turn this into an article or something, and so I just ask you your indulgence for a minute. I have thought long and hard about my assigned focus for this session, what it means to be human. I don't take this lightly, because not only recent events, but indeed throughout history, the concept of the humanness of Black people has been situated in contested, contradictory, and controversial spaces. There is no doubt that as an African American man, I have had to muse deliberately on what it means to be human, because acts of abject abuse, dismissal, and violence against people who look like me have made me come to grips with having to define for myself and to reaffirm for myself that I indeed am human. When I take the time to think about, let alone inventory, the number of Black lives murdered at the hands of police, and if that inventory includes the alleged reasons for these shootings, I am left with the disdainful conclusion that to some, especially those with authorized positional power, I could not possibly be seen as a human being. The disregard and disrespect for a breathing Black body signifies for me that just by inhaling and exhaling, being the markers to identify one as being human through that fundamental exercise of life, does not exist. When a Black man can be shot at point blank range 7 times in the back by someone who was intended to defend and protect, I'm left to draw the conclusion that my body and bodies that look like mine are bereft of that defense and protection, but are open to be objectified and dehumanized. I'm further left to conclude that my being human cannot possibly be determined by the predispositions of others, though my humanity is so often threatened by others' failure to see me or recognize my humanness. This is a sobering and a sobering mental and emotional journey to abdicate my own sense of being human to the whims and predilections of others, that my being human hangs on the benevolence of someone else's acceptance and can in some way regretfully mitigate my own affirmation of my humanness, and compels me to live with a tension between acquiescence and resistance, a constant tension, a daily tension, a nagging tension that angers me and ignites a spirit within me to make the evaluator know that I am human in whatever way that I can. So I make a distinction between life and being human. In my mind, living and existing share a definitional space, though some may argue that living is more substantive, more compelling than merely existing. And while in some ways I might adopt such a position, I find that when considering living and existing in the same ring as being human, human wins the bout hands down in that contention. So Denise knows this. Recently, I've been poring over texts when I've not been dealing with being a dean. I've been poring over texts that articulate arguments on Afro-pessimism and Afro-futurism, or the notion of Black utopia. Frank Wilderson, in his text, Afro-pessimism, has piqued my interest, my opposition, and simultaneously my agreement with the tenets he presents in his text. Reading this text comes at as I am reckoning the dissonance I'm living through as a Black man, watching other Black men and women being murdered through the channels and platforms of social media, and watching as well as walking in protests that assert the mattering of Black lives. And Wilderson argues that my humanness actually does not exist. I bristle with his contention, but I read on to find out the antagonizing and yet affirming content of his thinking. 2/3 of the way through, way through the text, Wilderson asserts human life is dependent on Black death for its existence and for its conceptual coherence. There is no world, Wilderson asserts, without Blacks. Yet there are no Blacks who are in the world. The Black is indeed a sentient being, but the hobble of humanist thought is a constitutive disavowal of Blackness as social death, a disavowal that theorizes the Black as degraded human entity. For example, as an oppressed worker, a vanquished post-colonial subaltern, or a non-Black woman suffering under the disciplinary regime of patriarchy. The jolting part of Wilderson's assertion is that my humanness or lack thereof is ascribed by a Black man to the benefit of everyone who is not Black. In fact, Wilderson assigns my existence to that of a prop in white people's drama. Indeed, I only exist, Wilderson says, so that white people have a baseline other with which to compare themselves. But even my otherness does not make me human. I'm an object, an essential existential object for white people's humanity. Y'all, I cannot tell you how emphatically enough how I have fought with Wilderson's assertions. I have contested the functionalist position into which he has positioned my life as a Black man. And yet there is something about his stance that grievously resonates with me and decrees there is some merit, some veracity, some hard-hitting, unfortunate truth to what he writes. Painfully, Wilderson places before me the very idea that the atrocities that Black people face must be understood as abjection rather than degradation. And degradation would at least signify transition, while abjection speaks permanence. I gotta be honest with you, this is not easy for a Black man like me who has been alive through the tail end of the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the lie that racism no longer exists movement because of the election of President Barack Obama, and the Black Lives Matter movement. And in each of these contiguous epochs, the fundamental truth embedded in each of them is the primacy of the humanness of Black life. I'm still grappling with Wilderson's positions as I have reached to the text by Alex Zamelin, who offers a different way of celebrating my life in his book, Black Utopia, The History of an Idea from Black Nationalism to Afrofuturism. And I want to thank Denise for putting me on this journey, she and one of my doctoral students. So before I attempt to use Zamelin's work to bring balance, because Denise knows I have talked to her over and over again about I gotta have some balance because Wilderson is driving me up one wall and down the other. So I need balance. But before I attempt to use Zamelin's work to bring balance, I feel required to offer that in this very process, in the weighing and the judging between contested ideas, in the very process of ascertaining the congruent as well as the incongruent ways my own thinking deals with these ideas, can be found one of the ways by which I am choosing to define and assert my humanness. I am coining a phrase here that I'm calling conscious conscience. Somebody may say that that is a euphemistic way of expressing being woke. But for me, having the ability to weigh the efficacy of ideas that have the potential to yoke my mind and emotions with them is an example of my being human. Having a conscious conscience means that I'm awakened within the depths of my inner being to weigh and evaluate what it is that enhances my being. What is it about what is presented to me that adds to my health? Having a conscious conscience allows me to ascertain the morality of speech, the morality of behaviors, and that mere axiological capability speaks to my humanness. How can I say this more plainly? The fact that I can offer moral opposition, to decry injustice, to feel the physical and symbolic instruments of supremacist machinations, and to therefore resist them, to me, is a clear indication of my being human. And so having a voice, and coming to realize that I have a voice is an indication of my humanness. I'm taken by the words, and I'm almost done, of Zamalin, that Zamalin writes. He offers, laws can restrict freedom and brutalize bodies, but they cannot squash sovereign mind. Intention creates imagination, which becomes articulated through speech. Verbal utterances give nascent political ideas reality to the speaker, who is no longer seized by hampering doubts of their impossibility. Awareness of one's autonomy and political freedom are analytically distinct, but the first is often a precondition for the second. So, I have a sovereign mind. I'm convinced of that. I have a sovereign mind. And because of that possession, because of my sovereign mind, I'm able to exert my humanness. I think deeply, I evaluate, I feel, I respond, I resist, I define, I imagine, I envision, I reflect, I emote, and so therefore I declare I am human. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So I think that what you're raising in your comments is the tension between what room we can etch out as Black people to define ourselves and how we are constantly defined, or not just defined, but sometimes completely unthought. Like I keep thinking about again, thinking about all of these shootings and the way in which it's not just about the person who got shot, right? There's all this collateral damage. I always refer to it, it's like dying a million deaths. Because every time it happens, we die, we die spiritually all over again. And right. and then to do it, the violence, even the immediate violence, isn't just directed toward the person. It is with, children in the car. It's with significant others in the car or significant others on the phone. I mean, it's a disregard, not just for the humanity of that one Black person, but the idea that somehow, these folks lie outside of our universe of moral obligation. That to me is so very striking. And so I hear you struggling with those realities in the context of constantly trying to still be who we are, and really who we've always been. I always tell, my students, there's two ways you can look at Black history. You can look at it and you can go, woof, that's just terrible. No wonder why they're at the bottom of every good list and at the top of every bad list. Or you can look at it and you can say, wow, it's amazing that they're even still here, that they still exist, that they, that they've persevered. So I'm wondering, well, let me say something a little bit about where this whole question, what does it mean to be human, comes from. And it's a conversation going on in Black studies now, but it's an old conversation. As you know, I think Black people have constantly been in that refrain of Black Lives Matter, which is it's not just an affirmation in the way, like the way in which you just stepped into it, but it's also a question for us many times, right? As Larry Neal says, as we wrestle with that white thing within us. And so that question really, for me, goes back to Sylvia Wynter's work. And, in like right after the Rodney King riots in 1992, they do an investigation of the LAPD and actually San Diego PD. And one of the things that they discover is that the police officers, well, not just the police officers, but several officials, including the police officers, were using the acronym NHI to refer to the people that they consider, Black men and other people that they consider undesirable. And NHI stands for No Humans Involved. And so that is the way they were referencing Black men in the police records. And so she writes this article where it's called No Humans Involved, a letter to my colleagues. And she's basically calling out, she's asking what kind of logic is in place such that, these police officers or anybody can consider a group of people outside the domain of human, the universe of moral obligation. And she directly says that, she's asking those of us who are academics to think about our culpability and responsibility in facilitating and upholding this knowledge. And throughout the rest of the article, she goes back and really is doing kind of a genealogy of thought on the human and what it means to be human and how it shows up. And so essentially what we have is, right, a very Eurocentric notion of what it means to be human. Like the epitome of human is Eurocentric, and we can extend that today. We can call it Western centric and several other things. But so she's saying the struggle that we're facing right now is man, which is the human defined in Eurocentric terms, versus little h human, which is what you're saying, just what it means to be existing as a person, alive and determined every day. And so I think she really sort of lays out the struggle, and it's from every article from that one forward, she's going deeper and deeper and deeper into answering this question from many different facets. And what she contends is basically, we cannot, and this is similar to Wilderson's point, we cannot take up Black Lives Mattering in the context of the current order of knowledge. It doesn't understand Black humanity. It doesn't have a space for Black humanity. It doesn't, our bounds for humanness is what we managed to create besides and beyond what the mainstream sort of narratives are. So she's arguing that we have to be about moving toward a new order of knowledge, which is, I think, I feel like what's happening in Black studies right now, is that quest for, thinking about how to move into a new paradigm where we can understand human from the interaction of the many genres of human beings that exist, rather than just the European conception and grand narrative of what it means to be human. So I feel like part of this sort of bringing up new orders of knowledge, I know my work very much leans into that. And, I'm always trying to pose a serious challenge to rationality as the dominant paradigm in academia, primarily because, to me, rationality disavows what love requires, which is a level of intimacy. And rationality really works to keep us at a distance. And it's not rationality. I don't want to make an argument that it's rationality in and of itself, but I do want to say the fact that rationality is the dominant paradigm through which we think that we solve problems. So you, in your work, have this concept of critical spirituality. And I'm wondering how you're thinking about how critical spirituality leans into this whole notion of, reordering knowledge in a way that we lean into this question of what it means to be human.
Yeah, that's a good question, Denise. One of the things that some people have to understand about when I talk about spirituality, if you don't mind, I'm not talking about religion. While there are some people who define their spirituality through their religious experiences, that is not, in my mind, the only way for someone to articulate what spirituality is. I coined critical spirituality a number of years ago, and one of the reasons I did that was because spirituality really has served as a foundation upon which African Americans have built projects of resistance and have redefined what the dominant society has really required of us as people. And these projects of resistance have caused us to reconstruct actually definitions, reconstruct institutions, and to reconstruct what it means to be human, especially when it comes to those people who have institutional, economic, and political power. And so our spirituality, in many, many ways, has really helped us to redefine for us and for other people, because we will articulate these redefinitions from our spirituality. Our spiritual kind of engagement will then redefine and will articulate what we mean. I believe that our spirituality has helped us to resist. Our spirituality has helped us to flourish in a context of resistance, of struggle and conflict. It's given us the inner strength. Our spirituality, not for everybody, but for some folks, our spirituality has given us the inner strength to reflect critically and then to engage in what I've called performative creativity as a part of critical spirituality. And that performative creativity allows us to rethink, reflect, redesign, to consider new ways of envisioning, but also not just, for lack of a better word, not just navel gazing, but also how do we strategize to bring those things into reality? How do we cause those things to manifest? How do we cause these new meanings for who we are to who we say we are to be manifested? And so for me, critical spirituality includes what I like to call a militant faith, and it's grounded in possibility and revolution. And for many people, talking about spirituality is grounded in some kind of docility, some kind of status quo. But that's not at all the way I see spirituality. I see our spirituality really kind of enforcing a militant or an active faith,
Mhm.
that then is all about not reproduction, but revolution. And how do we bring about change? How do we, substantive kinds of change? I also, and I'll stop with this, I think that our spirituality helps us to define what some authors have called the sacred self. There again is this redefining of humanity, of our humanness, a sacred self. And that sacred self comes in direct opposition to how we have historically, how black folk have been historically defined by the dominant, hegemonic ways of looking at what it means to be black. And so this kind of sacred self grows out of a reflecting about ourselves, a reflection about how we relate to the rest of the world, and again, how we define ourselves. And so for me, our spirituality is all about that. It's all about this militant or this active faith. It's all about reconstructing. It's all about redefining. And it's all about, in some form, of revolution, of turning things upside down in a phenomenal way.
So actually, we have a question here in the chat, but let me see if I can make a bridge between the question and what you're saying, because so as a curriculum person, I think about this notion of us defining ourselves. I think is hugely important, right? I mean, how do we even continue to exist or be sane? If we don't have that. But I do think so. My thinking about curriculum is that curriculum is the story we tell our children about who we want them to believe that we are, and ultimately who we want them to be. Okay, so it's that important, right? It's not just what you learn so you can get a job.
Right.
It's the narrative and the impact of the story that we tell is huge. It's life or death, for many of us. And we have a lot of absence in the standard American curriculum where Black people are concerned, or we have a lot of reductionism in the standard American curriculum where Black people are concerned. So I'm starting to do this research right now because I think theoretically we've made an argument about the impact of that absence on in the making of Black identity, in the making of but also that we could talk about, for instance, the doll experiment as a evidence of how white supremacy impacts Black children. But I think we can also produce potentially lots more empirical evidence around that question of how important the narrative is to who we think we are, and to how we are perceived. I mean, part of what's going on with those police officers, right, is that they have a reel in their heads, and sometimes one that they don't even recognize, that associates Blackness with criminality and danger and all of these things, because we've engineered that narrative. It is no mistake that narrative has been engineered throughout our history. And is functioning whether we recognize it or not. And so, I think there's a huge space missing here, right? You're going to be more engulfed in the tyranny of a doubleness, if you don't know your history, if you don't understand the context, where you come from, and how that brings you to this present moment, or in this context, So, I just think, just like we've all been searching, trying to understand, like we've been through this movement, that movement, and we're still here.
Right. I agree, Denise. I totally agree. And I might be minimizing something here. I might be. And I have thought about this long and hard. before I would even talk about this. And so it might come off to somebody that like I'm being paranoid. Okay, so I need to preface this by what I'm going to say, by the fact that for somebody you might define me as being paranoid. But I need you to think about this for a minute. I have looked very carefully as a dean. I have looked very carefully at the process of naming in emails.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the to in emails. Now, there's no way you can convince me that unless you put names in alphabetically, you put names in as to who you think of. Who do you think of? Who do you think of? And I have taken a hard look at this over the number of years I've been a dean. Almost all of the time, I'm either next to last or I am last
Mm-hmm.
in the list.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of the time,
Mm-hmm.
I'm either next to last or last. And I've had to come to grips with the fact of saying, I will not ground my identity on being last in this list.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I will not. I know that I am of value, even if it is only of value to me, and I define myself, I nonetheless know that I bring value to this position or whatever, to EHS, to Miami, whatever. But and I've got to tell myself that.
Right.
It's like that's a, for some people it may not even matter, but for me it's a microaggression. And one of the things that I'm noticing this, that even now after being 6 years as a dean, nonetheless, still, it was just something that came out yesterday. I'm at the end. I'm right before the people who are copied.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right before the folks who are copied. Now, granted, somebody might say, you know what, Michael, that's really silly. That's really silly. But when you are fighting to recognize your own identity,
Yeah.
and recognize that this is a fight, that your humanness, one of the things that I would suggest to people, put the names in alphabetical order, or put the names in the order of the schools in alphabetical order, or whatever. But you know, and I've wondered, do I raise this issue, or do I just shut up, let it go? I got 3 months, and
Right.
it's been going on for 6 years. So what do I matter? You know, what does it? But it matters to me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I'm going back to what I said earlier. Am I allowing somebody else to define my humanity, my humanness,
Mm-hmm.
by where they put me, and then I have to fight for my own sense of identity.
Yeah.
You know, and so I didn't mean to take us off track, but that's the whole point
No,
of
I
one's
think
humanness.
I do. I mean, I think that is the position we find ourselves in the context of a systematically anti-Black world, which might also sound paranoid, but
Right.
when you look, it's tons of evidence. It's a preponderance of evidence, and this is why we don't make central the Black narrative to most of what we do, you know, because it would reveal horrific things that are beyond even the horrors of slavery, the insidious way in which this, what again Winter calls it, we find ourselves confronting our narratively condemned status.
Yeah.
And so I think this is about kind of logics of anti-Blackness. We always are talking about white supremacy, but white supremacy has a coinciding logic of anti-Blackness that's very specific. And I want to go to this question though, and maybe we can slide that into this conversation. And so could we expound on Black Lives Mattering not fitting the current context of knowledge? And perhaps, and in other words, what is an example of the current order of knowledge, and what's an example of a new order of knowledge that fits mattering? You wanna tackle that?
Yeah.
Or I can jump in.
Yeah. Um, th- Help me to understand the question about how do we extend this whole notion of mattering?
Hmm.
Um, uh, you know what? I don't know if we can overemphasize, especially in this context.
Hmm.
I don't know if we can overemphasize mattering. I don't know if um, for me, um, mattering is I'm here.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? I'm here. Deal with me.
Hmm.
Engage with me. Um,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I, I don't know. Um,
Well, so this is what I say, because I feel like this question is right up my alley. So, uh, I wrote a paper last year. I think it was published last January or something like that. But it's really thinking about, I kind of take on this whole notion of a new order of knowledge. And specifically, I go after writing in academia, the academic template for, what's considered professional writing, or, what's um, considered good scholarly work. And I really argue that within the confines of the academic template, there's Black lives don't matter. Like, the question of mattering can't even really be um, dealt with in that context, because if we go back fundamentally, if we go all the way back to Plato and the whole notions, sort of foundations of rational thinking. I mean, what's there is, rationality in the way, I don't want to be specific in terms of saying this is all rationality's fault. But I am trying to say something about the way in which rationality dominates. And oftentimes with very troubling and not concrete evidence that is the best way to solve a problem, right?
mhm.
We've decided that it is. And so I think rationality, we can sum it up in, it works to define, distance, and dominate, right? And this is the way it has worked in Black lives for sure, to define, uh, attempts to define us, to maintain a certain distance so that you can dominate. And I think that is sort of rudimentary when you think about the racialized human hierarchy. That's engineered. That's not like, oh, just a casual thing that popped
Yeah,
up. That's been engineered. It's part of the narrative. And it puts white people, it puts Europeans at the top of that hierarchy. And, some scholars will say Black people are at the bottom of that hierarchy. Others, like Frank Wilderson, will argue that we are not even in the hierarchy, but
not even in it. Right.
but we're there to allow the hierarchy to
To
exist.
exist.
Because
Yeah.
the relationship is, you know, uh, everybody can come to America and gain ascendancy by not being Black,
Hmm.
not being Black American. And so I think um, that's another sort of deeply rooted logic. Sylvia Wynter she will draw this back to evolutionary biology again, natural selection, in this whole process of being selected and deselected, or people, uh, the survival of the fittest context, the way the eugenicists use that foundation,
Hmm.
whether they were doing it rightly or wrongly, but you know, but so what she's arguing is that, particularly in the humanities, so her argument is that the sciences have really really focused on sort of figuring out the body. What we have not been able to wrap our head around, and I think we're further. I mean, Sylvia is like 90 something years old now, right? So she's writing this stuff mostly like 60s, 70s, 80s. And then into the early 90s is probably the last things that she's writing. But the argument that she's saying, the social sciences and the humanities in particular, like what we haven't really figured out is the possibilities in the depth and complexity of the human consciousness.
Yeah.
Not just the brain.
Right.
But,
Right.
what we manage in a state of consciousness. And so even this whole notion of, we create a narrative, then we project it onto our institutions, and then we forget that we actually created it because the institutions are now breathing life into and manifesting it. So even in the way that, I was talking to someone the other day about how we can clean all the racist language up out of the law. You know what I'm saying? And we can make all the language neutral, but we will still leverage those laws in very racist ways. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about the institutions and the structures. It is about them, but it's not just about them. It's also about the logic that we abide by in our own everyday practices, that continues to put us in a situation of both white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And let me explain a little bit about anti-Blackness, because I think people conflate it to mean simply that you don't like Black people. It doesn't mean that you don't like Black people. It means that there is a structural logic that makes Black problematic and inhumane. And that, you can read classic American literature, you can look at the way we do history, you can look at many things that reaffirm over and over again this whole notion that we live in a systematically anti-Black world. But on a deeper level, and this is very much, I want to very much shout out Frank Wilderson, Sadia Hartman, Jared Sexton, Fred Moten, because I think these are like the critical people really pushing the conversation. They've got a whole new generation of young scholars following them. But the notion, like for instance, Sadia Hartman talks about the afterlife of slavery. And she's referring to, and then she tell you, inadequate health care, poor quality education oftentimes, early death, high infant mortality, high the mortality of Black women giving birth. So she just rattles off a number of things that define this moment, not as outside of or beyond slavery, but as still very much attached to the institution of slavery, in the way that it defines that the system feeds off of Black people's existence. Somebody has to be at the bottom of the ladder to define the top of the ladder. Somebody has to, somebody has to do the work and do the work for free, for all intents and purposes, to keep the thing moving as it needs to move. And so I think when you look at the anti-Blackness work, this is where they're going. They're challenging the ways in which the relations that defined life on the plantation are still currently defining the relations in our society. So you can read lots and lots about that. I just want people to understand that it's not as simple as, or even about not liking Black people. It's much more complex than that. And because this is the logic of our society, even Black people, even us ourselves struggle with anti-Black logic. It is not just like only certain people get it. And the only way you can recognize it and then decidedly move against it is you got to study. You got to know the histories and in the context. Otherwise, you don't. So I think there's lots to be said about how the current order of knowledge as it is structured, both in white supremacy and anti-Black logics, makes mattering as much a question as it is a question, a pleading, as much as it is an affirmation, because of the context of the society that we live in. As much as we want to say, I'm my own, we still got to deal. You still got to open them emails and see your name last.
Still got to handle that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, we have a question from Louise. She's asking us, how do you cope with Black fatigue, always having to deal with everything around these issues? That's a great question.
That is a great question. That's a great question. I can honestly say to you that, and I mean this sincerely, my spirituality is my solace. It's my comfort. I mean, I run to it. I run to my spirituality, hands down, and the solace of being with my family. Now, that all of that might be too pragmatic for some people, but I can honestly tell you that that's what keeps me going. That, especially when you're right, you got to handle all of this all of the time. It's consistent. It's never a letting up. Never ever a letting up. There's a constant, for lack of a better word, fighting for your identity, fighting for yourself, your own sanity. It's all the time. And if I did not have my own spirituality and my family, I would really have some major problems in answering those emails all of the time. You know, so that's what works. I know it's rather pragmatic, but that's what works. That's what works for me.
I think, I have to remind him all the time, y'all, sometimes he needs to take a moment and go see his pastor.
Yeah, you do. You do.
But
you do.
I want to answer that by saying this little story. So I'm writing a book of short stories right now, and one of the stories I'm writing is called Black Crazy, and I've been debating about whether I should change that title or not. But I want to say something about where I got the idea and like how these pieces came together, because I think it speaks to this whole notion of, what can so easily happen to us, when you slip into the darkness. So there's this wonderful, wonderful book of short stories by Nafisa Thompson Spires, and it's called The Heads of Colored People. And one of the short stories in there is about a Black professor who's leaving a historically Black college. No, he's leaving a predominantly white college and coming over to a historically Black college. And several things happen in this story, but they give him this mentor, this Black woman who's been around the college for a long time, and she's very eccentric. She got her name is like DIY or something like that, and she's got this really eccentric personality. In the beginning, he's kind of unsure, like, should this person even be my mentor? And he's talking at the same time to one of his colleagues back at the predominantly white institution. and he's complaining about this office mate that he has. And the guy at the predominantly white institution said, well, you should talk to your mentor, you know. And so he was like, yeah, sort of like, yeah, man, I don't know. She's kind of like this. And he starts describing her. And the other Black professor says, oh, she's Black crazy. And so they kind of get into this conversation. But when I read the story, it reminded me of when I was a new professor at Colgate. And there was a professor there. He was a brilliant man, but he was a little like, I would go, he's a little strange, or he's a little like, you know what I'm saying? We would be in the conversation and he would just take it off somewhere else, or he would say something profound and then say nothing else, or he, you know, was just a little like, not crazy, but there's a little like, what's going on with this man? And so he also had developed narcolepsy. So he would fall asleep in his lectures, and that was all in the student grapevine. And so for a long time, I didn't understand. I just kept thinking, he's a little, you know, I couldn't bring myself to say crazy. So I would just go, he's just a little, But when I started putting the pieces together, because I was in a big back and forth debate / I don't know, public argument in my last years at Colgate. And I remember saying to one of the senior faculty of color, you know, I was just telling her, I'm like, I'm so frustrated. How do I find myself on the front lines of, you know, this debate? And where are the faculty of color? And she said to me, she just looked at me and she was like, have you ever thought about the fact that it's your turn? We fought this fight. And so I started putting all the pieces together. This professor, he had been at Colgate since 1970 something. Like, so he had to be there all alone for almost 20 years, for all intents purposes, more or less. And his wife and his son leave because they were like, we getting out of this itty bitty. Oxford is huge compared to Hamilton, New York. And so so I started to understand that he was, I mean, this context, being in this context, being the only one, you know, sacrificing his family to sort of, you know, stay in this context, has made him a little, you know, and then I started thinking about all the other places I've seen that. And then I started thinking about how I'm becoming the crazy professor now, because sometimes I can't hold it in anymore. You know, it doesn't always come out right or clean, or sometimes not even articulate. But, you know, I've had to say to myself lately, like, you know, we got to find another way, you know, to, you know, to save our own sense of sanity, because it will just drive you crazy if you don't find something else. Spirituality, you know, meditation, some other way to deal with the constant, and deal with, on top of all of that, the way in which everybody else around you makes you feel unreasonable for pointing the thing out.
One of the things that I know that I've come to where voice is concerned is, especially this whole idea of somebody saying that one is crazy or one is objectionable or whatever for being a certain way, is I have come to grips with and have embraced and now articulate that I am an angry Black man. Ta-da. Okay? I'm an angry Black man. And while I'm not now, last week I thought I was going to get on top of the post office and just start doing all kinds of crazy things because the stress was off the chain. But I'm not that, you know, no, I'm not, but I'm angry. And my anger allows me to know I'm human, because I have had it with the number of people being killed, Black folks being killed just for nothing, no reason whatsoever, being killed at the hands of police officers. And and so when one says that you're an angry Black man, then there are all kinds of negative connotations about that. But I've come to the point where I don't care what the negative connotations are. um, I am angry about what happens to Black people in this country incessantly. And if I were not angry, I would not be human. You know what I'm saying? And so my humanness is expressed through my anger. And while someone might say, well, especially uh, so, our kids, Carol and my children, have called me Malcolm and my wife Betty, and so they have, over the years they have just said, boy, and of course they come from a whole different. You talk about genre, they come from a whole different time period, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just now that my older son is becoming angry.
Mm-hmm.
My older son is now becoming angry. He lives out in San Francisco, and now he's like, Dad, I understand what you're talking about, and it's okay for me to be angry. It's part of my identity, my who I am, my humanness, to be angry that people are being treated. I mean, you and I talk about this all the time, Denise, and that is, I honestly see a correlation between being love and anger. I do. I believe that those two emotions are powerful to bring about change. Love and anger. I honestly believe that my anger comes as an expression of my love for people who look like me, or people. I think about kids in schools that are getting a raw deal in their education. I've got to love them enough to get angry about that. Yeah. To really become, incensed about the conditions that some people are living in. And so I don't see my anger as being deleterious. I see my anger as being motivating. I find my anger as being something that's going to really cause me to not accept the status quo, not to allow hegemony to reign, but really begin to deal with stuff. I won't tell you all of everything, because I still need to work at Miami for 2 more months, so I'm not gonna say everything. But it's there are things that have happened recently that I have been angry about, and instead of holding my anger, what I did was I articulated my anger in a way that I thought was going to impact a situation, if you will. Okay. And it didn't. Mm-mm. All right. It did not. All right. But I was able to have my voice. Mm-hmm. And I was able to feel, even if it did not vindicate anything, it didn't change anything, I nonetheless was able to say what I needed to say. And I was able to express my anger in a way that, I wasn't obnoxious, if you will, right. But my voice had to be heard. And I can't anymore. Honestly, I'm discovering I can't sit still any longer. I just can't. And I think you're right. The whole notion of saying that my humanness really does still nonetheless depend on somebody's predilections about my humanity. Yeah, I know. But I also am maybe it's my age, and Denise always teases me about my age. So maybe it's my age, mm-hmm. where I'm like, I don't care anymore.
Yeah. I always say that about my grandmother. Actually taught me that one of the last times I had a conversation with her. I was living in New York then, and I was down in the city visiting her, and I was about to go out. And so I was in the bathroom combing my hair, and she came in the bathroom and she sat on the stool, and she just started telling me everything. But like just didn't matter. I was a little like, whoa. She was using curse words. She was talking about people. She was just saying everything she ever had to say. That I was like, oh, okay. So this is, I can't wait to be, I can't wait to get there. when you just feel like you've done it all, you've seen it, like, and now I'm just going to say whatever it is I got to say. But I believe adamantly, and I've written about this as well in the context of trying to teach race in predominantly white spaces, is that I felt like a lot of time it's two Denises. Well, there's Professor, and then there's Denise from Detroit, and they're constantly
Oh yeah. Yeah.
in conversation, if not battle with each other sometimes, because the professor wants to believe that if I just lay out this evidence here, that they will follow, or they will get what you're saying, or they will at least critically think about what it is you're saying. And Denise is constantly like, this is the 50th damn time you done asked me that question, and the professor is saying, now calm down,
Right.
and say,
right.
and just repeat the question again in a different way. And so I think it's a constant. What I find over the years is that you do not do the subject matter justice when you are constantly trying to serve it like you give a baby Dimetapp, right? Like you're constantly trying to add some sugar to it to make it more digestible for people who are gonna refuse it, and that never goes well in my experience. And so I think it's been really difficult to figure out how to tell the truth, how to have a truthful, authentic, honest conversation that doesn't get stronghold by the fact that we have to say systemic racism as opposed to white supremacy, or we have to say race and diversity and inclusion as opposed to Black Lives Matter, or we have to say all lives as opposed to Black. I mean, I just think it shrouds us yet once again in a sort of an untruth that keeps us from doing the work that needs to be done. So I really, really think that is critical. Yeah. So we got some questions here. So Dr. Dantley, how do you find balance between being indifferent about the negative connotations of expressing your anger and being disgusted from others not considering your anger?
Oh, that's a great question. That really is a great question. I have tried, honestly, it's like what Denise just said. I don't think I'm bifurcated all the time, but you're right. I've had to just say, okay, did I do what I had to do? Did I say what I had to say? And I did. And so I felt good about that. But then what you talk about disgust, what I thought was, please, I said, well, this is Miami. I ended with, well, this is the way this place operates. And so, and instead of really being disgusted, I had to come to grips with what I tried to say. I did say it, but how it was not taken. This is Miami. This is the way it is, and this is the way some of the culture of the university is. But I nonetheless felt good about the fact that I did voice my issue. I did voice my concern, and I did it forthrightly. I did it forthrightly. And it's like Denise, what you just said. The issue for me was I can't say it in a nice way.
No,
I can't ask this question in a nice way. I can't even ask it in a euphemistic way. I've got to come straight out with this. This is the question. Why did you do this? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah. So sometimes I have a balance. Honestly, I got to tell you, sometimes I have a balance that says, well, you know what? I got another life. I've got another life outside of the university. I got another life. Mm-hmm. And so I balance it that way. And then there are other times when I just say, okay, I've done what I should do. and I felt obligated. I really did. I felt obligated to articulate what I did. I felt under conviction to do it,
Mhm.
and so I did it. I did it, and I had, I was hoping that the issue would turn differently, but it didn't, and so I had to come to grips with that as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I hope. I
Yeah.
hope.
I just think about how this, it's almost torturous, because then you're waking up in the middle of the night thinking, man, should I have said that, or should I have not said that? Should I have done it this
Yep.
way? Or, oh, they probably really think I'm crazy now.
Right. Right.
So it's just constant, like it's constant. And it's hard to talk about it out loud. And really, honestly, outside of this moment, nobody would listen,
No.
quite
No.
honestly.
No. No.
Or we would just be complaining, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, or what do you people really want?
Yeah.
As I've been asked many times. So Darrell has a nice long question in here. So a bit of a long question, so forgive me in advance. Given the long arc of your career, so he must be talking about you.
You got jokes, Denise.
The various historical moments of Black struggle that you've lived through, what are the differences and similarities of this moment that you see? In taking the long view of your career and experiences, what institutional initiatives, energies, or efforts have you seen at Miami and beyond that you wish we'd revisit? And what do you hope is the horizon as you begin your departure from academia? Oh, he's definitely talking to you.
Darrell, thank you so much for that question, that comprehensive exam question. Thank you so very much for that. Thank you for that. Well, I've been at Miami. I got my master's at Miami way back, and I have been a professor at Miami since 1986, and so I have seen the university go through a number of these kinds of epics, if you will. Um, and nonetheless, what I have seen that has remained the same is kind of the very fabric of the culture of Miami. And even though there have been different people who have played different roles to try to change things at Miami, some stuff has remained pretty constant. And it's been unfortunately it's been um, a shame in my estimation. Now I got to say this: I honestly believe that there is some hope now at the institution. I believe that the president wants to see some change. That he wants to see some change, especially when it comes to issues of race. I do believe, however, that Denise is right. That so often race and anti-blackness is shrouded in diversity and inclusion, and let's have the conversation is consistently about, let's have a broader notion of what diversity is, so that we can include more people, and that might be cool, but the issue that's facing Black people at the university is still undealt with. um, I have seen Darrell, I have seen students really become adamant about change, and that's been really very positive. The other thing that I have seen, however, Darrell, has been EHS working outside of the university to bring about change. You know what I'm saying? That EHS has not focused just on Miami University, but the work that is being done in Over the Rhine, the work that's being done in Middletown, the work that's being done in other areas in Cincinnati, et cetera, in Hamilton. That has given me hope that we are not just dealing with things at Miami University. Um, I think the Institute for Community Justice and Wellbeing, again, is a way that this is demonstrating um, a hope that I'm sensing, and so the work that's happening at Aiken, again, and at Douglas, that's hope that I see, honestly, that is impacting what I hope, honestly, Darrell, will continue after I'm gone. Um, So I think that there is. I know that while Kevin and I, when we were working together, we did our very best to make sure that our faculty had people of color. I mean, it was, and we weren't secretive about it. We were not at all secretive about bringing in folks of color to be on faculty, and so um, I wish the university were farther along, but I also understand the context in which the university exists. I come up 27, like I guess you do too, but I come up 27 whenever I come, and man, oh man, it's an interesting encounter, especially these days. It's getting more and more and more interesting as the Trump signs are everywhere. They're everywhere on 27, and the Confederate flag, though it's torn, it's still waving. And so I understand the context within which Miami is, but then I also understand that the Freedom Summer was a part of the Western College. It was part of the university. So has it come where I would like it to be? No, Darrell, it hasn't. But I think the work of your work, man, the work that Denise is doing, the work that so many other folks are doing, I think is going to impact what happens at the university in the long run. Just one thing I would say to you, man, is stay with it. Please don't go anywhere. Stay with it. Stay with it, because you're making a difference. You are making a difference. You and so many other people who are on here tonight, you're making a difference. So please don't give up on that.
Yeah.
Please.
I feel like you got to say that a couple times to these young scholars, because they break out. They got a lot of options.
Yeah, they do. They have options, and please, but Darrell, stay, man. stay planted, because the only way the university is going to really change, and it's going to take time. And I know the older I'm getting, I don't believe in incrementalism, because it drives me crazy. It drives me absolutely crazy that we're talking about this in 2020. It drives me absolutely insane. Well, not insane, but it drives me, to a point of just again, anger that we're still talking about this in 2020. But we've got to have young scholars like you, who will have the fortitude to speak what has to be spoken, and stay. Did I say stay, Darrell? Stay. and just stay with the university, honestly.
So I want, we only have we got about 10 more minutes or so. So I wanted I want us to pull in anger and love and talk about revolution. And first I want to say, because you said the word, and you know how much I love saying the word. I'm trying to transition to abolition, but I'm just that girl, it's in my DNA. It's how I was raised. And so, but I want to talk about that because I think that it's hard to talk about. It's easier in this moment, but it's in general pretty not an easy thing to talk about, because when you talk to lay folks outside of academia and you say revolution, it's almost, you're burning down buildings and shooting up people or whatever. And we're not talking about that per se, although that could happen along the way. That's not what we're talking about. No. And then if you talk to people in academia about it, they are still on this Marxism, or still this whole notion of revolution is taking over, overthrowing the government, or overthrowing the institutions or what have you. And that's not what we're talking about either. And so both Michael and I, my most, I read a lot on revolution. I read a lot on movements, social movements, and I have the good fortune to be in a lot of conversations with, family members and friends who are, activists home base the community. And I want to make that clear because I think it's a whole bunch of us activists home base academia. Because every day that you walk in the classroom and you tell the truth, it's about race, about white supremacy, about it's an activist, it's definitely an activist stance. But what we are talking about when we talk about revolution is we draw a lot on Grace Lee Boggs' work, and this whole notion of Grace Lee Boggs with also James Boggs. I think her Next American Revolution was basically a re-articulation of revolution and evolution in the 20th century. So what she is arguing is that we need two-sided transformational change, you know, of our institutions and of ourselves.
Yeah.
And but she really leans into, I mean, they both basically argue that the next American Revolution won't be about civil rights. It won't be about, you know, human rights. It won't be about, ending a specific period. It won't be about the, in industrial change. We've had all those revolutions. What it will be, it won't be about acquiring more resources. In fact, they argue that it will be the first revolution that requires us to give up some things. And, I always say to that point that the biggest challenge to us in this next moment is ourselves. Like, what are we willing to give up? How are we willing to rethink our day-to-day living so that we lean into more justice for more people? So this whole notion of revolution really rests on our relationships to each other. And for instance, when, I was talking with her about this before, a few years before she passed away, about, like she says, she would say she sees it coming, and she sees these moments, and it's like, talk to us a little bit more about where you see the moments. I had taken a group of students to visit her, and she was 96 at the time. And she said that, you can look around, the people who are, she's a longtime activist in Detroit. So let me just use this as an example, but she's known all over the world. The urban garden movement in Detroit, the New Freedom School movement in Detroit, where, Detroit parents have been in a battle with the Detroit public school system for a while. And it's just been one issue after another. So a couple of years ago, they started the New Freedom School movement, where, teachers and parents and other community members have come out on Saturdays to teach kids, basically, in the museum over here, in the community center over here. And so it was kind of a underground movement. So in these little spaces where people are forging new possibilities, unbeholden to the systems that continuously reinscribe us in inequity and injustice, is the challenge, I think, that is before us. So could you talk a little bit about how you'll be leaning into the revolution?
Yeah, I first of all, I'm really very pleased that I haven't taught master's students in years, and so this is the first time I'm teaching a course for EDL, and my master's students will be reading Grace Lee Boggs' text, and so I'm really, 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 really excited about that. I think that the revolution is exactly that. It's going to require, what are we going to give up? What is it that we have to give up for the good of of other people. What are we willing to sacrifice for the good, for everybody, for somebody else? And I am excited about the fact that, again, as I mentioned earlier, my combination of love and anger really pushed me to bring about some change. Really pushed me to think about how do we rethink stuff, or for me, revolution requires us to not just rethink. How do we throw out what we've been thinking and start afresh? How do we start afresh in our consideration of things? So one of the things that I know I'm going to be doing after I rewire is really finding ways to work more more intimately with schools in Cincinnati, and how do I get to move this whole notion of revolution into those schools, and how do we and you know, I recognize that I'm talking to some folks who may have issues, but I'm trying to figure out how to radically blend um, uh, church with school, not proselytizing, but really the whole notion of the spirituality that I was talking about earlier. How do I blend that in spaces that are real, in spaces that where the whole notion of reconstructing identity really is important. And so yeah, I want to do that, and I see it in my own life. I only got 3 more months at the university. I think it's 3 months. It's November 20th is the last real date. November 20th, 2020 is the last real date. Even even though officially it's December 31st, but November 20th, 2020 is really it. So that's what I want to do. I want to see how I can provide that kind of revolutionary thought between religion and education, and do some stuff that I've been writing about for years, and see it kind of overturn, try at least to overturn what's been the hegemonic ways of looking either at religion or at schooling. So that's what I want to try to do.
So there's one last question in here I think I can answer about my mention of the Freedom School movement in Detroit. It's actually called the New Freedom School Movement. But you know, it's actually a perfect example of, I don't know if my student is in here or not, but we just had a great conversation today about what he's going to do for his dissertation, and I just love it. But it reminds me of this question, because let's say public education has disserved in many ways Black children. I can't even begin to call all of the issues out, and not in a way that I'm blaming teachers. I don't want to blame teachers. It's a system. It's a system in place that does not regard their learning. We see a transition from segregation to desegregation. In segregation, children were in school with people who understood their plight, with people who understood the connection between education and liberation, you know, with the people who they went to church with the people who lived down the street with them. After desegregation, school becomes about discipline, and less and less about their own historical and, you know, cultural context. And so that causes a whole slew of issues and inadequacies that we've been battling for a long time. And before and after and since Brown v. Board of Education. And so what Black people have had to do is to steal away and find our own spaces to educate our children and ourselves. And often this happens I think uh, uh, in an underground context. And I think it happens in an underground context because historically, when Black people managed to build a Wall Street, or when Black people managed to put up a school that's, churning out excellence, um, it's basically destroyed in one way or another. And so, or taken over. And we could talk about schools, we could talk about publishing companies, we could talk about all kind of things in the way in which this has happened consistently. So I think, and I feel like in this moment, especially, there are going to be, when everybody's now concerned about supposedly Black people and how we can help Black people. I mean, for me, what I really appreciate about this freedom school movement is this is Black people helping Black people. And I think that's critical because social justice, the greatest act of social justice, is for you to make it possible for other people to speak for themselves, not speaking for them, not, treating them as if they can't do anything for themselves. It's about how do we create a context in order of knowledge, a space where, because that's critical to our own sense of self-identity, self-esteem, self-determination. But it's really hard to manage in the kind of society that we live in. And, some people can look at it and say, like, there's a book about Detroit, and the whole book is about how Black people messed up Detroit. And so never mind we can lay out the economics that were putting Detroit on the downslope long before it became, 85% African-American city. But that's not the predominant narrative. And you see a lot of this struggle manifest in the whole saga around Detroit public schools. And I think anytime we have attempted to carve out some space to do right by these kids, it has been undone or, under-resourced or a million other things. So I feel like, I say this about, my growing up. I came up in a very activist family. So, one of the things that I could come home from school with all kinds of knowledge, like, Tarzan was the king of the jungle, or, Christopher Columbus discovered America, or whatever it was. But somebody, my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles would stop me and give me a whole other history lesson. And then tell me at the end of that I still better get an A. So it was constantly learning how to negotiate those knowledges. But I could do that because my education schooling did not hold my education hostage, right? My parents made sure I was in a many different countercultural spaces where our sense of ourselves was affirmed. But as the 70s went on and we got into 80s, all those spaces were, any of those spaces that were supported by the city or by social services were shutting down. Community centers were shutting down. Ys were shutting down. All kinds of things were closing off to us. And so it became, how do we manage to do something for ourselves that is not beholden to, the whims of the state or other people whose intentions might be very good. But I think when you usurp a person's sense of self-determination, that's not freedom. And so I think that's, where the new freedom school movement grows out of that kind of sentiment. And although I think you have lots of different kinds of people participating in it, it's not just Black people doing it, but it's Black people leading it. is Black people laying down, what it is and what it's going to be in this context. So, and I don't really know how you find out more about it, because it really is more or less off the radar. And I only know about it because of the connection with the Grace Lee Boggs Center. So, yep. So I think this is it for us. We're actually 7 minutes over. So this broadcast has been recorded, and we will be posting it hopefully on our diversity webpage. A lot of people have been asking me about that. So if you want to, share it with other people or use it in class, please feel free to do so. It will be posted at some point. I think I saw Erin in here tonight. But I will turn it over to her tomorrow, and I'm assuming when she has time to get it up on the website, I can send out a notice. So join us in 2 weeks. I do believe we are talking next about white supremacy specifically, and I think my guest is Dr. Coates. So please join us then. And until then, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of the week. We're over hump day, and we're almost to the end of this week, and we can close the Zoom office and get some rest. So thank you. You wanna say?
I'm just grateful. So grateful for everybody having been here, and this has just been tremendous to see you, and thank you for giving up an hour and a half of your time tonight to share with us. Thank you so much, Bina. I'm so glad you were here. I'm so glad, Bina, that you were here. Absolutely.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, I'm done.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.